how do we get the courage necessary to try to achieve a very difficult dream, for instance. Every time we try to do something difficult, we get afraid. And most of the time, we just don't do it because we are so scared that things might go wrong and we might fail. So in this video, I will show you how you can actually overcome this fear. And to do that, I will start with a story. It's a classical story because it is a story from the Bible. And if you don't believe in God, it doesn't matter actually, because this story applies to all of us, regardless if we believe in God or not. And you will see it very clearly in the story. So this is the story of Jonah. And this story is interesting because it has a pattern that repeats itself every time we have this situation when we want to do something very difficult. We go through the same process that Jonah goes through this story. So it's very interesting because we will see in his situation exactly the same thing that happens with us. So it's going to become much easier to understand what we can do to overcome our fear. So let's go and talk about Jonah. So Jonah is a prophet, and Jonah at some point receives a call from God. God asks him, Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh, and I want you to tell those people in Nineveh that what they are doing there is wrong. Their wicked ways, they're not good. They have to stop this, and if they don't repent, I will destroy their city. So I want you to go there and tell them to stop being wicked. Otherwise, if they don't repent, I will destroy the city completely. So it's a warning that you will give to them. And Jonah said, oh yeah, sure, I'm going there. But then, what did Jonah do? Instead of going to Nineveh, Jonah took a boat and went exactly the opposite way to Tarshish. Back then, Tarshish was kind of the end of the world, as far as possible from Nineveh as one could get. And then he goes into this journey in this boat to this place because he thought to himself, I'm going to Nineveh? No way! Those guys, they're my enemies. They want to destroy me. Imagine if I go there and tell them, hey, you wicked bastards, what you are doing is totally wrong. You have to stop this. They will kill me. I'm not going to do this. No, thank you very much, sir, dear God. I'm going the other way. So he went the other way. And as he's going the other way in the boat, he at some point falls asleep in the bottom of the boat. So he's there just relaxing. And then the waves begin to rise and the sea begin to get very agitated, and the weather becomes horrible, and there is a lot of wind. All of a sudden, everybody's afraid. Everybody on the boat are afraid of what's going on. And the sailors become very worried that the ship might sink because of all that's going on, and they begin to think, oh, what's going on? Maybe somebody in this boat has done something wrong. Maybe the gods are upset and they are creating all of this turmoil in the waters. So they begin to ask everybody, every passenger, what's going on? Did you do something that could cause your gods to be upset with you? And then eventually they find Jonah sleeping in the bottom of the boat, and they wake him up and say, hey, what are you doing sleeping there? Don't you see how things are going? How the boat is shaking like this? Did you do anything wrong with your God that could upset your God? And then Jonah think, oh, well, actually, maybe. Well, you see, the thing is, God told me to go to this place called Nineveh, and I figured that probably would be a good idea. That's why I'm going to Tarshish. But now that I think about it, maybe God is not so glad with me. So maybe I'm the cause of this. So the sailors realize that he is definitely the cause of what's going on. And they have to think, oh, what are we going to do? So Jonah himself, admitting that he did wrong, he decided to say to the sailors, oh, you know what? just throw me overboard, because after all, I'm causing this. Maybe if you throw me overboard, the gods will just be satisfied and it's going to be all right. So after some deliberation, because the sailors didn't really want to throw him overboard, but they realized there was no other way, so they throw him overboard, and immediately the waters calm down and the winds becomes calm and everything is peaceful again. Of course, for the boats and the sailors and the passengers, but not so much for Jonah, because Jonah, once he goes into the water, he is caught by a very big fish, probably a whale. So a whale comes and catches Jonah and swallows Jonah. And Jonah goes with the whale to the bottom of the sea, where he spends 3 days in the belly of the whale. And then he doesn't drown in the process. He's alive inside of the whale. I know it sounds crazy, but stay with me. He's there alive inside of the whale. And now he is repenting because he realized that he did wrong. He didn't do what God told him to do. So he begins to pray and ask God for a second chance. And God, being very merciful, decides to give him a second chance. So God brings the whale back all the way to where Jonah has departed, and the whale vomits Jonah, and Jonah now is back where he came from. And at this point, Jonah realizes his mistake, and he decides to go to Nineveh. So he goes to Nineveh, and he declares to the people in Nineveh, "Hey people, you have to stop your wicked ways, because if you don't do that, God will come and destroy your city. So either you stop this now and repent, or you will be in trouble." And to his surprise, people actually listened to him. They realized that, well, you know what? That's true. We have been doing things very wrong here. We are full of sin, and yeah, we should probably repent. Even the king agrees with Jonah, so everybody decides to repent, and because they repent, God eventually preserves the city and doesn't destroy the city anymore. And then the story ends. Well, there is a little bit more, but that's enough for now. Why did I tell you this story? Because actually the story of Jonah, in a sense, is our own story. Every time we have the situation when we receive a calling, but we don't answer this calling in the proper way. What do I mean by that? Imagine this situation where, let's say you are working in a company, you have this job for 10 years, but you don't like this anymore, you don't want to do this anymore, and your real dream is to actually open your own company. And you have been dreaming about this for a long time, but you never do anything about that because, you think, oh my God, if I decide to open this company, maybe it's not going to work. I could just lose money, I could lose time and effort. Maybe people will make jokes after me because I'm trying to do this thing and it didn't work. So yeah, what are people going to say about this? I don't know, I'm not so sure. I can't be sure that's going to work. Since I can't be sure, it's probably not a good idea to do. If only I could be sure that this is going to work. But, well, while I still can't be sure, I'm not going to do this. So this is our reaction most of the time when we have a dream, when we have something that is calling us. In the case of Jonah, it was God that literally called him. But we can think about this in a different way. If we don't want to involve God in that, we can think that God is actually our conscience. So our conscience is telling us, you know what? There is this thing that you should probably be doing. And often we have our conscience saying this to us, but we don't want to listen. It's the same thing like Jonah, that he doesn't want to listen to God. In our case, it's our conscience. We don't want to listen. And it's totally understandable because actually there are risks. Every time you want to do something important in your life that's going to be valuable, that you believe will bring big benefits to you, most of the time this involves risk. There is a very real risk that things might go wrong. It's always like this. For everything meaningful, there are risks associated. So we are afraid. That's totally understandable. It happens to you, it happens to me, it happens with everybody. But there is an even bigger risk that we don't appreciate, which is the fact that if we don't do exactly what our conscience is telling us to do, we might end up in the bottom of the sea, in the belly of the whale. And what does that mean? When we don't attend our conscience keeps bugging us. It keeps, inside our head telling us, hey, there's something wrong. Hey, that project, you should probably do that. And it keeps there. It's there all the time saying this to us. And that's why when we go to bed at night, we try to sleep and we can't, because our conscience is there telling us, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. We're like, oh my God, how can I get rid of this? It's saying this thing here in my head. It's so upsetting. And eventually you sleep. And in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., you wake up and you can't sleep anymore. Because again, your conscience is telling you, if you did this before, as I told you, you wouldn't be in your life in the situation now. So we believe that we can get away from our conscience. We believe we can just go to Tarshish and be fine. It never works. We know that very well. It never works. So that's what happens in the story when Jonah is in the boat and the sea is in this turmoil. It is the same thing. It's our life that we can't be in peace. So our conscience bugging us is just the beginning of the problem. Things can get much worse. How do they get worse? It is like this. Imagine again that you have been in this job for 10 years, you want to create your company, but you don't do it. So you spend another 5 years not doing what you know you should. And at this point, you are really, really very, very frustrated at being in this job. You, at this point, absolutely hate your job. And not only you hate your job, now you are feeling miserable. You are full of resentment. You are resentful. And you are also very bitter. And then with everybody you interact, you are always this bitter person, always grumpy, and you are this very sad person. You are actually very upset with life itself. You hate yourself. You hate your life. You hate everybody around you. You can't see meaning in this life. Why I have such a miserable life? When you get to this stage, you are in the belly of the whale. You are down in the hell. And you go to hell. You really transform your life in a sort of a hell when you are in the situation, when you don't do the things that you knew you should do. And now you become so full of resentment, and also you are so full of regret for all the things you haven't done that you become this very bitter person. And you know that this is true because you probably know this kind of people. You have seen people like this around you if you are not yourself already this kind of person. Because that's how normally those people become what they are. They often didn't do things that they knew they should do, they were called to do, and now, in a sense, it's as if they were being punished for not doing what they were called to do. And now their lives became hell because of this. So what we have to understand here is that when we don't attend our call, when God calls us to do something or our conscience calls us to do something, of course there is a risk. There are risks associated. There are all kinds of dangers. We might fail, we might go into trouble, and we probably will at some point, to some extent. But if we don't do, we will be in much worse trouble. And that's what most of the time we don't realize. We don't realize that we are having a fear that's totally understandable of failure, but we're not having fear of all the consequences of not attending our call. And these dangers associated with that, the danger of going to the belly of the whale, to the bottom of the sea, is way worse. So fear itself is not a problem. Fear is fine. Fear is one of the things that we use to guide what we are going to do or not going to do. What I'm trying to say here is that the real fear that we should have is not the fear of the failure of doing the project, but the fear of all the horrible consequences that we will normally have to face if we don't embark in the project that we are calling to embark on. That is the real fear that we should have, because the consequences here are way worse. So the real problem is that we are misplacing our fear. We are fearing something silly in comparison to what happens if we don't actually go through the process that we should go. Because as a matter of fact, God or our conscience, they want us to get better and better and better and better. They want us to achieve bigger and bigger things in our lives. They are always pushing us in this direction. So every time we become an obstacle to this because we don't do what we should do, we go eventually to the belly of the whale. So we have to be very careful about this. But the good news is that even when we are in the belly of the whale, in the bottom of the sea, if we repent, if we change our minds and decide to do what we should have been doing since the beginning, eventually we can come back and recover whatever we have lost, and we can effectively try to do what we need to do. And in the process, we might actually succeed. It would have been much better if we didn't go to the belly of the whale to begin with, but even if we are there, we can still get to the place where we should have been going since the beginning. So that's the good news. With this pattern, we can now understand that every time we have a big dream, we have something that we understand that is important for us to do, we should be very careful not to dismiss it, because the consequences can be very dire. We have to understand that in our lives, what makes us bitter, what makes us resentful most of the time is not so much the failures that we occur as we try to achieve something. The failures, they might be bad, but we might, of course, be upset about them. But this doesn't upset us as much as the eventual regret of not doing what we knew we should be doing. The regret of not doing most of the time is way worse and really contributes the most to turn our lives into hell. So we have to be very careful about this and understand that in the end of the day, we are in the situation where if we go into the projects that we believe is dangerous, we will face risks. But if we don't go, we will face risks even bigger. So we shouldn't be fooling ourselves. Although we love to fool ourselves and think that, oh, I can just be off the hook here. Oh, I can just be off the hook here. I can just be fine and pretend that I didn't have this call. We love to believe that. We love to fool ourselves. But we have to understand that we are just fooling ourselves. We can't get away from God and we can't get away from our conscience. They will bug us. They will follow us all the way to the belly of the whale, all the way to the bottom of the sea. So be very careful about this. So if you think that this video helped you somehow to understand the situation you have when you are confronted with a calling, please do me a favor, write in the comments, what's the project that you would really like to achieve, that you would really like to embark on, but you feel quite afraid to do so.